right, that could go on for a while. Experience the long-lasting freshness of Clorox Scentiva, available in Clorox Scentiva Lavender Scented Bleach. Use as directed.
The Stone Zone on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Stone Zone. NATO is trying to sabotage a Ukraine peace deal, with President Donald Trump working overtime to secure a peace deal between the Ukraine and Russia. NATO is providing support for ramped-up drone attacks against Russian nuclear bombers, military bases, trains, and other facilities. It is clear to me that NATO is openly trying to start a nuclear war with Russia on the eve of peace talks which took place yesterday in Turkey. Moscow is now under attack again, and this is quite extraordinary because it comes on the heels of a visit to Ukraine, where U.S. Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal, also known as Da Nang Dick, the guy who lied about seeing combat in the service in Vietnam when he was never even in Vietnam, met with President Zelensky. By the way, their combined hotel bill was more than $1 million for the U.S. taxpayers. That must be some incredible room service. Ukraine has now claimed over 40 bombers, about a third of Russia's strategic bomber fleet, were damaged or destroyed this past Sunday, while Moscow said only several planes were struck. The attack comes amid recent reports that some intelligence agents have gone rogue and are not disclosing information from Ukraine within the Trump administration, which may include forewarnings of this recent attack. However, Ukraine carried out what they called the Russian Pearl Harbor attack, as I say, the very day that Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal arrived in Kyiv. Now, you can understand how the Russians may look at this visit by two U.S. senators and assume that means that this attack on Russia has the imprimatur or the approval of President Donald Trump. The White House put out a statement that the president was not forewarned of this attack, which General Michael Flynn, who was with us in the Stone Zone yesterday and was the former national security advisor, told us was extraordinarily unusual. Only a week ago, it was shocking to learn, even though it got some coverage in the mainstream press, that the president had not been informed of an assassination attempt against Russian leader Vladimir Putin when there was an attack by the Ukrainians on his helicopter. It's interesting that back in 2016, after Trump won, Lindsey Graham and his warmonger friends went to Ukraine and claimed that Russia had attacked us by hacking the 2016 elections, a claim for which there is no evidence whatsoever. Graham and his neocon buddies have been trying to start World War III for over a decade. In my opinion, President Trump should renounce the actions of Lindsey Graham and make it clear that he speaks only for himself. He doesn't speak for the Trump administration, nor does he speak for the U.S. Senate. Meanwhile, the long talked about investigation into Joe Biden's auto pen scandal has finally begun. Ed Martin, the Justice Department's attorney in charge of pardons, also in charge of weaponization, emailed staff that he has been ordered to investigate clemency supposedly granted by Biden to his family members and an extraordinarily large number of death row inmates, including sex traffickers, murderers, drug dealers, and others, all during Biden's final time in office. Ed Martin wrote in the email that he will investigate whether Biden was mentally competent and whether others were taking advantage of him through the use of the auto pen or other means. The email from Martin specifically focuses on the preemptive pardons Biden issued to 6 members of his own family and the clemency he granted to 37 murderers, drug dealers, rapists, and other violent criminals. What's perplexing is the fact that none of those violent criminals had expressed any remorse. None of them had officially applied for pardons. which is a legal process. It is not necessary to apply for a pardon in order to receive one, but for someone who is a hardened criminal, one has to wonder what the motive was or who the progenitor was of that decision. Biden, of course, pardoned 5 members of his own crime family hours before Donald Trump took office, specifically pardoning his son Hunter, something he said throughout the final year of his term he would under no circumstances do. Biden's blanket preemptive pardon to his brother James Biden, to his daughter-in-law Sarah Jones Biden, to Valerie Biden Owens, his sister, and her husband, John T. Owens, and to Frances W. Biden, a sister, gave cover for any nonviolent offenses they may have committed from January 1st, 2014 through the date of the pardon. And then, of course, on December 1st, Biden pardoned his son, Hunter. You remember Hunter. He had a laptop that was a cornucopia of criminal evidence of various crimes that he committed, but 51 former or current intelligence officers insisted to us in the run-up to the 2024 election that was all Russian disinformation. As Miranda Devine proved in her crusading reporting with the New York Post, the contents of Hunter Biden's laptops were authentic, they were genuine, they were accurate, and they were stunning. The pardon, which covered any federal crimes by Hunter from 2014 to 2024, ended what was an ongoing case that delved into many of the criminal actions of the Biden crime family. Now, recent reports have revealed Joe Biden almost certainly had no clue what was going on when these most recent pardons were issued, nor did he know what executive orders he had signed. Regarding the Biden pardons, Ed Martin, the Deputy Attorney General, said, I had a whistleblower in my office 10 years ago, a senior Democrat who worked in the White House, saying, look, it was these 3 people that controlled access, and they, in fact, were making money off of it. I'm not certain that we can prove that yet, but the point is I think we have to investigate it and get to the bottom of it for the American people and to protect the process. With their sweeping powers, of course, the Justice Department has the ability to examine the bank accounts of any of those suspected of taking money for pardons with the auto pen. They had no problem accessing my bank accounts when I was under investigation. Fortunately for me, they found nothing wrong whatsoever. Although Martin is not ready to name names, he said that senior Democrat whistleblower worked as a high-level advisor to Joe Biden's 2020 campaign and later in the White House. Now, the 3 gatekeepers are alleged to be Chief of Staff Ron Klain, former White House advisor and admitted communist and Mao Zedong enthusiast Anita Dunn, and Biden attorney Bob Bauer. My sources tell me that Neera Tanden and Steve Nelson were 2 other Biden aides who had access to the auto pen. Martin said that the former Biden counsel, Steve Ricchetti, and Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, were also lead characters in the Biden White House. This reminds me very much of the situation that surrounded Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was incapacitated by a debilitating stroke, was both mentally and physically incapacitated for the full 3 years of his final term. And his wife, Edith Galt Wilson, functioned as the de facto president of the United States. Back in the days before television or the internet or even radio, of course, the president could get away with not being seen. And in fact, Woodrow Wilson was not seen in public for the full 3 years of his final term. It is written that Edith Galt Wilson would put the pen into Woodrow Wilson's hand and move it across the federal documents requiring his signature. She did this with the assistance of the White House Chief of Staff, the notorious Colonel House. Joe Biden's wife and son, even Sleepy Joe himself, may be forced to testify before the House Oversight Committee regarding the attempts to cover up his clear mental unraveling, according to committee chairman James Comer. Now, you have to wonder that if Chairman Comer sends a subpoena to Joe Biden, to Jill Biden, to Hunter Biden, to any of the Bidens, and they refuse to testify, will they be prosecuted the way Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro will? Interesting question. Comer announced that Jill and Hunter and the former White House press secretary Karine Jean-Pierre could also be called in, and that he said they would be subpoenaed if they refused to agree to testify. If the trail leads us to the next step, which we believe could be Jill and Hunter Biden, we will go there and subpoena them as well. The committee has actually already called Dr. Kevin O'Connor, the physician who insisted that Biden had a clean bill of health, and 4 other of Biden's handlers to testify. Comer said that they're all lawyered up and all are taking this very seriously, noting that O'Connor definitely was not telling the truth about Joe Biden's health. People will not remember this, but in the immediate aftermath of the historic debate in which you saw Joe Biden literally melt down on national television, the excuses that were made by the Democrats were extraordinary, with Kamala Harris saying that no, indeed, Joe Biden was sharp as a tack. Didn't look too sharp in that debate to me. The Oversight Project previously released findings showing a correlation between the increased use of auto pen signatures and Joe Biden's worsening mental decline. The group found that 2 different auto pens were used, with an analysis of executive order signatures showing an increased use of the auto pen as President Biden's mental and physical decline accelerated. President Trump has called for those who operated the auto pen to be jailed. Of course, that would only come after they were charged and went through a trial, because even in America, everyone is innocent until proven guilty or until put through a Soviet-style show trial and put through a kangaroo court. But there's still a finding. Meanwhile, we learned that the grand jury has issued subpoenas in the case of New York Attorney General Letitia James. The FBI is officially investigating the New York Attorney General for potential mortgage fraud linked to multiple real estate transactions. A grand jury in the Eastern District of Virginia has now issued subpoenas related to these allegations. We've had Sam Antar, who writes for whitecollarfraud.com, who's documented and shows you the actual documents of a 22-year spree of mortgage fraud right here on the show. And I think we were among the first in the Stone Zone to break this story. Ironically, James is now the first public official who previously maliciously prosecuted President Donald Trump to potentially face criminal charges. I reiterate my invitation to Attorney General James. She's welcome to come into the Stone Zone at any time to respond to these charges and defend herself if she wishes. So far, what I've heard from her is crickets. The FBI Director, Kash Patel, stated, "This case, I can tell you, is being handled by our professionals who are subject matter experts, and they're reporting directly to myself and Deputy Director Dan Bongino." The investigation to James was opened after a criminal referral, which came from Federal Housing Finance Authority Director Bill Posey, as previously reported here in the Stone Zone. Incredibly, Jones claims to be fighting for the taxpayers, saying, "We stood up against the dismantling of the Department of Education. We are suing Donald Trump." And she claims, of course, all of this is retaliation for the conviction she obtained against Donald Trump, which I predict will be overturned. You're in the Stone Zone. Whatever you do, don't touch that dial, because we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone on the Red Apple Podcast Network. This National Foster Care Month, Marine Toys for Tots is providing hope to children who need it most. Staff Sergeant James Caldwell, who grew up in foster care himself, shares that while handing out gifts at a Toys for Tots distribution event, a little girl looked up at him, reached into her bag, pulled out a stuffed animal and said, "Someone needs to make sure you get a toy too." That simple gesture embodies the heart of Marine Toys for Tots, ensuring every child, including those in foster care, experiences the kindness that can transform their future. Visit toysfortots.org today.
This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Psst, healthcare pros, word's out, and it's too good to keep quiet. Look, LinkedIn is revolutionizing job hunting, making it possible to search by specialty, shift preference, and salary. Endless scrolling is out. Whether it's a mental health therapist or dental hygienist, finding the perfect role is faster and easier than ever. Head to linkedin.com/healthcare and start your search today.
Shopping is hard, right? But I found a better way. Stitch Fix online personal styling makes it easy. I just give my stylist my size, style, and budget preferences. I order boxes when I want and how I want. No subscription required. And he sends just for me pieces, plus outfit recommendations and styling tips. I keep what works and send back the rest. It's so easy. Make style easy. Get started today at stitchfix.com/Spotify. That's stitchfix.com/Spotify.
The Stone Zone on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Now, here's a story that's near and dear to my heart. Turns out that the FBI and Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team hid Russiagate documents with a special coding in the FBI's case management database. This could explain why the report of Special Counsel John Durham, even though it documented the fact that the Russian collusion hoax was the greatest single abuse of power in American political history, it was nothing less than the use of the full authority of the U.S. government and the incredible abilities of our intelligence agencies to try to overturn a duly elected president utilizing two pieces of completely fraudulent evidence, the so-called Steele dossier, paid for and fabricated on behalf of Hillary Clinton, which falsely claimed that Donald Trump had dallied with Russian prostitutes when visiting Russia as a private businessman prior to his entering politics, and again, the false claim that the Russians hacked the DNC. So it's very clear that Mueller's dirty Democrats' lawyers hid exculpatory evidence within these files. Recall that my good friend General Flynn, who was with us yesterday in the Stone Zone, was forced into a guilty plea of one count of a false statement after partisan prosecutors tricked him and withheld evidence that they were required to disclose that would have completely exonerated him. They did essentially the same thing to me. My lawyers asked for the so-called CrowdStrikes report, which would have proved that there never was any Russian hack of the DNC, and therefore I couldn't possibly make a misstatement about something that didn't happen, but the judge denied that to my attorneys. It is a classic case of overreach. Speaking of overreach, coming up, we're going to talk about the incredible case of Chris and Aaron Mazzei. They're a couple from California whose life and family has virtually been destroyed by overzealous prosecutors seeking headlines but not seeking justice. Their story is so chilling that I decided to invite Chris Mazzei into the Stone Zone to talk about it. We'll be right back with that incredible story, so don't go away.
The Stone Zone on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Stone Zone on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We're back in the Stone Zone. I can tell you firsthand, I know what it is to be targeted by a vengeful and politically motivated federal government. They have unlimited resources. I know what it is to be the subject of a trial presided over by a hostile and hateful judge who essentially will not allow you to mount any defense whatsoever. I know what it is to have a judge who won't even allow you to enter exhibits of evidence that would have proved that you're an innocent, even though under the law, it's the government's job to prove you're guilty. You're not required to prove your innocence. It doesn't really work that way. But the case of Aaron and Chris Mazzei is so stunning, so overreaching, so outrageous that I wanted to bring Chris Mazzei on the show today to talk about it. The Mazzeis were successful California entrepreneurs. They had a history of developing entertainment content previously, directing and producing several feature films, all of which made money. But when they got a PPP loan back during the COVID-19 crisis, that's when the trouble started. Chris Mazzei, welcome to the Stone Zone.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you for having me.
So give us a kind of a quick synopsis of what went down in this epic prosecution of you and your wife. You were sentenced to 36 months of imprisonment, while your wife, Erin, was sentenced to 27 months of imprisonment. She is still incarcerated. The charges in the end were allegedly wire fraud and money laundering conspiracy for receiving a PPP loan to fund an entertainment project in Hawaii where you live. Tell us what happened.
Well, actually, we never lived in Hawaii, so that's the ironic part. We've always lived in California. Okay. This all stemmed because we had a project called Ohana that basically was a fictional character in a non-fiction world of Hawaii in the 1990s, dealing with the mob and the corrupt federal government over there. So I don't know if that's how it all stemmed from it, but we, during COVID, when it all happened, we were like everybody else, didn't know what was going on, was following directions by any and everybody. And, at that time I was reaching out to our local banks and they're like, we're not doing this program yet. We don't know what it is. And so that's when I started just kind of going online every day just to get questions. I had questions. I needed answers. And I reached out to, I don't even know how many different banks and loan originators, and one of them wrote us back and said, no, you can use projections. And it didn't seem off to me because back in the day, we used to own a No Fear store, and we got a traditional SBA loan. And one of the requirements is you fill out a whole Excel spreadsheet on your 18 months of projections. So it didn't throw up any irregularities to me or to us. So that is the issue that happened with the prosecutor. He didn't want to hear anything about the email. He just turned a blind ear. It wasn't part of his narrative.
So the loan originator advised you that it was proper to use payroll projections for the loan, which is what you did. You had done it previously when applying for an SBA loan. Ultimately, it was determined that the loan originator's guidance was incorrect. It would seem to me that agreeing to pay back the loan should have solved this issue. But for some reason, the U.S. attorney and a federal district judge, they seem to me to be looking more for a scalp rather than true justice. What happened next?
So, yeah, I mean, through this whole process, we once we learned that the information was incorrect, we said, okay, you've already seized the majority of it. Because when we first got the loan, I'm like, I do not want any of this money in my normal account. Like, this is not my money. So we put what we were told we were allowed to pay ourselves, and everything else went into a specific account for Ohana. And, that right there is their money laundering charge. But once we found out that the advice from the loan originator was not proper, we said, okay, what can we do? Like, let's sell our condo. We had bought a condo over in Hawaii because we were planning on shooting this pilot in summer of 2021. So, we sold that, and we came up with close to $1.2 million out of the $1.3 million. That was the original loan amount. And they just didn't care. They're like, no, you guys are hard criminals. We don't care. They wanted to treat us like the other people that you would hear on the news that bought Lamborghinis and didn't have businesses. And it was just sickening to us that we were being labeled that when we we're a normal family. I mean, we're basically similar to everyone that's listening to your program. We're not famous. We're not politicians. We're your average family that got targeted. And I think there's a lot of them out there that just don't have a voice. And so we're very thankful you're giving us a voice.
I mean, the case against you and your wife, Erin, seems plagued with prosecutorial abuse from the start. Federal agents seized all your accessible assets prematurely in May of 2021, but that's nearly a year before any charges were filed against you in May of 2022, violating a requirement to file charges within 90 days or return the seized assets. This included placing what's called a lis pendens, a public notice that a particular property has a claim against it on your family home that had been purchased 3 years well before the COVID-19 pandemic even occurred, as part of the plan to squeeze you and coerce you into entering a plea agreement. I still find the entire thing incredible because you were bled dry. You had already paid back virtually all of the PPP loan, yet they decided to destroy you financially anyway, when the matter could have been civilly quite easily settled simply by paying them back. You operated on the basis of bad advice, but they had no interest in that. In fact, as I understand it, the plea deal banned any negotiation that would have prevented you from arguing for a reduced sentence. You have two small children, yet they insisted that despite the fact that you were first-time, nonviolent, non-drug-related offenders, that you had to do serious time, ripping your wife now, who's still behind bars, away from two young children. This is really quite incredible.
No, I agree. And the problem with the house is when we got served our target letter, we had over $1 million in equity in that house. And we couldn't pull any cash out for legal assistance, so we got stuck with the Hawaiian court-appointed attorneys, which aren't court-appointed. Like, they are literally, it's a panel of attorneys, and you look any of them up, and they're literally, their main focus is personal injury. So they had no idea what they were doing, and anytime we would push them to, like, hey, look at, like, what you just said about the assets being seized ahead of time, instead of actually doing anything, they just went to the court and asked to be removed. That went on for almost 2 years until my father-in-law saw all this, and luckily he had a little bit of money saved up, so we finally were able to hire a private attorney. But at that time, that's when the government was saying, if you don't take this plea, we're going to file charges against my mom, who's 77 and has had no issues with our business at all, just to bring in the family aspect to get us to plea. It was just disgusting.
Precisely what they did to General Flynn, threatening to charge his son if he did not take a plea, or former upstate New York Congressman Chris Collins, who they charged with insider trading, despite the fact that there's no evidence that he conducted any inside trading. But they threatened to indict his young son if he did not plead guilty. The most stunning thing about your case is learning that the U.S. attorney used the money you paid back to turn around and try to buy your family home in the foreclosure sale. In fact, they actually sent agents to go bid on it. So they forced a foreclosure instead of allowing a normal sale, which would have allowed you to keep some equity. On top of that, as I understand it, the government hasn't applied the money that you paid back towards restitution, even though the court transcript clearly states that that is what the money would be used for. So in other words, they double dipped, they stole your home, and they got to keep your money. This is a cautionary tale, because what happened to you and your wife, Erin, can happen to any American.
No, I agree, and it was just out of dumb luck that we found out about the foreclosure sale, because I just remembered I was talking to my best friend on the phone right after I told him what our sentence was, and we were basically crying together on the phone. I've known him since 7th grade, and he's a very successful mortgage broker, and he said, well, let me see if I can just buy your house for you at the sale. When is it? And I'm like, they're doing it in 12 days. The sale was scheduled for 12 days after our sentencing. So he has his guy that's been doing this for 30 years buying foreclosed sales at the auction. He had a certain amount he was going to be able to spend, and it went over that. But I have the text message, and I think I sent you a copy of it. Like, the guy said it was unusual because federal agents were at the auction bidding, and they didn't win. The house ended up going back to the mortgage lender. But I mean, I would have never known that unless he would have offered to purchase it. And the restitution it's a battle. I just got off the phone with my attorney, and he's going to be writing a letter to the D.C. office about having that put in from the forfeiture to restitution. But no one knows where the money is. Like, I've asked, and nobody can. I've written multiple letters to the District of Hawaii, to the court, and no one knows where it is. So that's a little concerning.
I must ask you, on a personal level, how has the impact been on your wife, Erin, and your kids?
You know, Erin is a very strong woman. That's what I fell in love with. When she first had to surrender, the judge was cruel and made her surrender wouldn't let her get designated to her camp. She had to surrender to the Marshal Services in Fresno. We live in San Luis Obispo, California, so it's a hour and a half drive, and I took her there, and the Marshals didn't even understand why she was there. They didn't know what to do with her, so they put her in county jail in Fresno for almost 3 weeks. It was the toughest thing she's ever been through, and is one of the toughest things I've ever had to hear on the other end of the phone as her husband. She's fine now in her camp in Victorville. Obviously, it's not ideal, but she's just kind of keeping her head down and praying every day that we can get the truth out there, and somebody with some power can and some common sense can actually see what happened to us. Obviously, the conditions aren't great, but you know what? She said most of the guards and everyone there is friendly and understanding of the majority of the people. So she doesn't have bad things to say about where she is, but obviously this woman has never had a parking ticket since I've known her. So to even be anywhere near a federal facility is ridiculous.
So, Chris, have you thought about setting up a GoFundMe or a website where people can keep track of your case and maybe offer support?
Not really. I mean, I've been so busy. We own our own business. Through all of this, we were able to start a whole nother business under the most trying of times, and you know, it's doing really good. So that takes the majority of my focus. And obviously, I'm raising 2 young boys as a pseudo single father right now, and they're hanging in there. Our oldest obviously was more of a mama's boy, and I can tell he misses Erin. Our youngest, Nico, he always looked more up to me, so I think he isn't getting hit with the effect of it as much. But we don't need the money. I don't care about money. I just care about getting her home. But obviously our story could make an impact for other people. So I've thought about starting some kind of blog or something like that. And obviously Erin's keeping notes, and we are writers, so obviously this could be a book someday or a documentary or something that would just blow you away on what can happen to a normal family.
All right, Chris Mosé, thank you so much for coming into the Stone Zone, telling us your story today, and we will be praying for you and your wife Erin and your 2 young boys. Don't go away, folks. I'll be right back in the Stone Zone.
Faraday presenta Ojos con Alergia y Picazón contra el Jardinero. Y el ganador es Faraday Extra Fuerte. Para aliviar la picazón de los ojos por alergia, actúa más rápido y supera a Claritin y Flonase aún a las 24 horas. Faraday, adelante.
questioned whether the so-called reporters at the Washington Post are deranged. In an article investigating the, quote, mysterious drop in fentanyl seizures on the U.S.-Mexico border, the Washington Post explores what they call a new and puzzling reality. The explanation, they say, is complex. Of course, it's only puzzling and complex if one refuses to acknowledge that President Donald Trump has stemmed the flow of drug smuggling by enforcing the law against illegals entering the country on our southern border. Fentanyl seizures have plummeted from 1,700 pounds in 2024 to 746 pounds in 2025, according to the Washington Post. The decline is occurring even as the Trump administration has deployed thousands of troops to the borders and expanded drone flights. With more boots on the ground, you'd think that seizures would go up, not down. Now, you might think that if you fail to consider for a second that the thousands of boots on the ground provide deterrence against Mexican drug cartels. Avoiding being thrown in prison, something cartels don't have to worry about so much under Joe Biden, is undoubtedly a significant factor in the drop of narcotics seizures. A White House spokeswoman responded to the Washington Post by saying the drop in fentanyl seizures at the border is only a mystery to the Washington Post reporters suffering from a severe case of Trump derangement syndrome, also known as TDS. Everyone else not affected by TDS knows the simple truth that President Trump's closed our border to illegal drug traffickers, and Americans are safer because of it. As of March, fentanyl traffic at the southern border had fallen by more than half of the same amount last year, while Joe Biden's open borders were still terrorizing and destroying America. The Washington Post's theory is the drugs just stopped being cool this year. At least that's essentially what they say in their article. You're getting this generational effect. Illicit opiates are just not as cool as they were, an epidemiologist was quoted by the Washington Post as saying. It's amazing how fentanyl apparently lost its addictive nature as soon as President Donald Trump took office, apparently. This is why I don't get my news from the Washington Post, for the same reason I don't eat out of the toilet. A new poll out from Atlas Intel of the 2028 Democrat presidential contest has Pete Buttigieg in the lead at 32%, AOC at 19%, former Vice President Kamala Harris at 17%, Cory Booker at 10%, Governor Gavin Newsom at 7%, little Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania at 5%, Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan at 4%, and Reverend Raphael Warnock, the senator from Georgia, at 1%. You can make a poll say anything you want by the wording of the question, the order of the questions, the size and accuracy of the sample. Every credible poll that I have seen shows Kamala Harris would be the easy front runner. Makes sense. She just spent $300 billion running for president. And AOC is a surprisingly strong second-place finisher, although my favorite remains an AOC Jasmine Crockett ticket. Make my day. Thanks for joining us today in the Stone Zone. Until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Hello, folks. Larry Kudlow here. Pay attention, because China is leading the largest anti-American alliance since World War II, one that's already dumped U.S. bonds, grabbed 43 million acres of our farmland, and is plotting to dethrone the dollar. That's why IRA and 401k savers are protecting their savings with gold. Please go to freegoldguide.com/Kudlow or just call 800-621-3908 for your free gold guide on how to protect your wealth with gold 100% tax-free.